Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
When it comes to setting and meeting goals, the way we perceive our plans, progress, and potential could be what's impeding our success. We literally see ourselves as being closer to or further away from a goal than we really are, which distracts from the original plan so that we either focus too heavily on the broad plan or alternatively spend too much time working on the little details. This podcast really is for me. So I'm so excited to be talking to social psychologist and New York University Associate Professor of Psychology, Emily Balcetis. Her new book, Clearer, Closer, Better: How Successful People See the World, shows us research-based evidence that there is power in these misconceptions and what we can do and how to learn and use them to our advantage. I'm so pleased to have Emily with me today to talk about the science of goal setting and success. Emily, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. Your research in the area of behavioral science is fascinating. What led you to work in this area?
I was really just interested in how we can have better, more productive, successful lives. And I've been studying this for about 20 years now. And what I've concluded and what I found across all this time really is that it's not an issue of people not trying. It's not an issue of people not caring, because we do in both regards. It's that the tactics that we seem to be using just aren't the right ones to get the job done.
This is so great. I love hearing about the backstory about what led you to this area. Your TEDx talk on why some people find exercise more difficult than others focused on literal visual perception and how, when it comes to fitness, some people quite literally see the world differently from others. Can you talk about the process that led you to this solution to help people overcome these perceptions?
Absolutely. At the heart of it, I'm really a motivation scientist, and I was trying to discover what leads people to feel more engaged, feel like they can overcome challenges, and what are the features of a person or of the experience or the situation that holds them back from those feelings. And when we applied that question to understanding exercise, we found a really fascinating and unexpected result. So one of the things that we studied was people's physical states of their body. We took a couple of different kinds of measurements, one of which was the circumference of their waist and the circumference of their hips. You can create a waist-to-hip ratio. It's sort of like BMI, but it has better predictive ability to differentiate people who are in better shape and those people who are more out of shape. Now, what we found was when we asked everybody to engage in an exercise, walk to the finish line as quickly as possible, kind of like a race, but they were competing only against themselves, that the waist-to-hip ratio that we had measured earlier changed their experience of how far away that finish line was. And what we found was that people who weighed more, who were more out of shape, actually saw that distance as greater than people who were in better shape. So what this meant to us, and what we later discovered, was that perceptual experience really mattered. When something looks more challenging, people feel less motivated. They feel like it's going to be more challenging, that they don't have the resources they need to take on this experience. And because that perceptual experience changes their psychological experience, it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When they stop believing in themselves, they actually aren't able to do as well. So that was part of the problem that we discovered of what might affect their experience of exercise. And we wanted to see if we could figure out a solution to that. And so what we sort of triangulated around was the idea that our visual experience is part of the problem, but maybe it can be part of the solution too. So we came up with a strategy that would help people see that finish line as closer. We called it sort of eyes on the prize, or in the book I talk about it as a narrowed focus of attention. And by narrowly focusing their attention on the finish line, what we did was produce a feeling of closeness. That finish line now looked 20 to 30% closer to them by having narrowed their attention on it rather than looking around the world as they naturally would. And by seeing it as closer, it made it feel easier, and it actually led them to exercise better. They moved 23% faster. The distance was the same. The task was exactly as challenging, but they were able to move faster, and they said it hurt less. So by keeping their eyes on the prize and keeping that narrowed focus, we changed their perceptual experience, changed their psychology, and led them to have a better outcome.
Interesting, but so true. Like when I niche down like my personal goals, and they're really not small, but like you said, focused, it does feel like it's easier, or the distance is shorter to meet that goal.
Exactly. I mean, we can be talking about physical distance. We can talk about temporal distance. So time, that's another way in which our perceptions can affect the likelihood that we're going to succeed. Or we can look at the length of our to-do list. And when that seems really long, when it looks like it's really long, it might become that way because it feels more overwhelming. So when we talk about like general strategies for goal pursuit, like the best way, the best point to set our goal is one not where it looks completely overwhelming, where it looks like it might be impossible to achieve. We need to scale it back, and that narrowed focus can help us do it. It might lead to the illusion, even if it's not true, that something is less challenging, it's less far away than it would be in other circumstances. And by helping us use that narrow focus to scale back from what might seem impossible to moderately challenging but feasible, we might find a new source of renewed inspiration and motivation.
Awesome. Well, your new book, Clearer, Closer, Better, How Successful People See the World, isn't just entertaining. It has a clear message on how we can motivate ourselves to reach our goals. Of course, this is what we all want. Can you maybe give us a little summary and teaser on what the book is about?
Absolutely. So really, it comes down to 4 different strategies, like this narrowed focus that I'd mentioned, that can help us overcome different challenges that we might face as we are in progress to setting and meeting some of our toughest challenges, some of these biggest goals that we've held. So narrow focus is one of them, and we might use that when we're starting off with a goal that seems pretty far away. And this is a strategy that can help us sort of reset our mental state in order to take on this challenge. Now, a second tactic that I discuss is about visual frame and where we orient our eyes. There's research in psychology that shows us that what we see directly relates to what we do. So we can think about how we structure our environments, the visual sparks that we leave out on our table, on our desk, or that pop up on our phone instantaneously. Those are things that are visual cues that might lead us to act a particular way. If we're trying to diet, leaving chips on the table might be less helpful than leaving an apple on the table. When we're looking for a quick snack, that visual suggestion might push us in one direction or another to choose something that's in line with our goal or something that's not. When we keep multiple tabs open on the windows on our computer screen, that's like visual bait, sort of pulling us away to multitask when it wouldn't be that effective. So being aware of the power of a visual frame and what captures our attention can help give us greater understanding about why we feel like we're pulled in too many directions when we wouldn't want to be. And we can be more conscientious in sort of crafting a visual landscape that might set us up for success. A third strategy that I talk about is using the wide bracket. That's sort of in contrast to this narrowed focus that I talked about. And that's the idea that we might at times find greater benefits by taking a step back and literally seeing the big picture. Now, this can be effective for when we're trying to discover patterns in our own behaviors or choices. If we think about what we do from one day to the next, there might be choices that we've made or decisions that we've settled on that might not be in our best interest. And those are easy to rationalize from one moment to the next or one day to the next, saying, oh, that was just one mistake, or I just did that once, it's really not a big deal. But if we do that every day and we can rationalize and compartmentalize and then forget what might be a suboptimal decision, we might not see the accumulation of all of these sort of negative outcomes. And we really need to realize that what we're doing is every day maybe making a small choice or taking a small step in a direction that we don't actually want to. So sometimes I advise that we, reflect on the last 2 weeks of our experience. And maybe we're not aware of what we've done over the last 2 weeks. So being mindful in the moment and deciding, for the next 2 weeks moving forward, I'm going to track my choices. I'm going to track how I spend my time. I might track how I spend my money. And every couple hours, I'm going to sort of check in and collect data on myself. I tried this out myself and realized that in a 2-week period, I spent a lot of money unintentionally, spontaneously, and never thought about it. But by reflecting on what I had done over the last 2 weeks, I realized my sort of splurges or unintended purchases actually racked up to be quite a hefty sum. But I only realized that once I reflected on a 2-week period of time rather than what I spent day to day. And the last strategy, the fourth strategy that I talk about, is the concept of materializing. And that's the idea of making concrete what we might otherwise leave in our head. And I think a great example of that is how we schedule our day. Now, we all have lots going on. There's lots on our plate at any given point in time. And those things that are most important to us or that we have a commitment to or a responsibility for others or to others, we often put in our calendar. It literally gets a chunk of our time carved out and put into our calendar. There might be other things that are important, but maybe just for ourselves, or maybe they're relevant to a longer-term plan. And so we just sort of try to keep them at the top of our mind, but they don't get slotted into any particular 15 or 30-minute segment of our day. Now, we're far less likely to actually do those things that we just try to keep in our mind than those things that appear in our calendar. When we see it in our calendar, we're more likely to do it. When we just try to remember it, it's usually the thing that's going to get dropped from our daily activities. And this happens when we're thinking about like personal time often. We all have that sense that like there's just not enough time in the day, and what gets cut is the stuff that might be just for me or for a personal benefit or personal time or, what I need to recover personally, but not what's relevant to work or my professional obligations. But when we start scheduling time in our day to do our own personal, take care of ourselves and our own personal needs, well, then we don't forget about it, and it gets prioritized to the same degree as the other commitments that we've made. And that's the concept of materializing. When we write it down, when we see it with our eyes, it takes top billing in our mind.
This is great. I can't wait to pick up the book and take a look at it. The 4 strategies, my mind is swirling. Like, how can I really do better at maybe, like you said, taking time for myself? Because you're right. I'm like, oh, I'll take care of that later. I'm going to go to get, a manicure. And then it never happens because other things that are on my calendar get in the way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what you mean when you say there's great power in misconceptions?
I think part of it is that we use the word miss. And when we say miss, we often mean mistake. And so when we say misperception, when we talk about visual experience and misperception, our knee-jerk reaction might be to think that, we're talking about mistakes and where we've made mistakes. But that's not what I mean at all. Really, the heart of what I'm talking about in this book and what my research shows is that there are so many idiosyncrasies in how we look at the world around us. I use an example, that a picture I show in the book, where it's a line drawing. It can be interpreted in one of 2 ways. It might be the head of a horse or the full body of a seal. And when I show people, about 80% of people see the horse and 20% of people see the seal. Now, both people are right. Both interpretations are correct, but they're really quite different. Like, a horse looks nothing like a seal except for in this drawing. And so we might be inclined to call one of those a misperception or both of them a misperception, but that's just not true. What I'm trying to get at here is the idea that a misperception actually just might reflect a difference in experience. And knowing that there are differences in experience is actually empowering because it means now we have more tools to get the job done. If we realize that it's just in our own head, what we're seeing out there, the possibilities that we're seeing or the challenges we're seeing can be construed in a different way, we can see them differently, then maybe we don't feel so stymied or cut off at the knees when we experience an obstacle, right? There's another way around it if I just look in a different way.
I love this. And I think about the the differences in perceptions and diversity of your team. Like you want to have lots of different people with different backgrounds to maybe help you manage through those misperceptions or just open yourself to different ideas in different ways.
Exactly. That's a fundamental principle of this whole line of scientific research, actually, is that our own backgrounds, our own experiences have created a lens through which any one of us will see the world. And because our backgrounds are so different, what we see as opportunities, what we see as challenges, what we see as solutions will be really quite varied. And so when we bring different backgrounds and perspectives to the table, it just expands the menu of possibilities when we're trying to brainstorm our way out of some sort of predicament.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast sponsored by Workology. We're talking about the science of goal setting and success with Emily Balcetis.
Are you tired of putting your professional development on the back burner? It's time for you to invest in yourself with Upskill HR by Workology. We're a membership community focused on personal development for HR. Gain access to our elite community, training, coaching, and events. Learn more at upskillhr.com.
In your book, you use case studies of entrepreneurs, athletes, artists, and celebrities, but you also use a personal one of your own, where you walk us through your case study about how you set and work to reach the goal. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I think probably one of the dumbest things I've done in my life is what I ended up talking about in the book here, which is I decided that when my son was 4 months old, I wanted to learn how to play the drums. Now, like no new mother who's like excited to have their kid take a nap and go to sleep should try to then use that quiet time to learn to play the drums. It was totally counterproductive. And we also live in a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan that's like square footage-wise smaller than most suburban garages. So from the outside, it looks like this was a pretty stupid choice. But I made that choice. This was the goal that I set for myself because really what it was deciding conscientiously that I needed some time for myself, that as I was holding down a pretty intense professional career, I was juggling this transition into motherhood, and the thing that I was cutting from my day was time for my own personal growth and development. And so I was trying to, with intention, add that back into my life. And so I set this goal. I didn't play drums before, but this was something that I decided I was going to take on. I thought it would make me a little bit cooler. I thought it would be fun. I don't know if it made me cooler. It was fun. And at the end of the day, I was successful. It took me 9 months. I set the goal for 9 months. 9 months had just been an important unit of time in my mind. And decided that by the end of the 9 months, I wanted to be able to play one rock song on the drums and be able to do it pretty well and play a show for people I knew and some strangers to make myself accountable. And so really the book is talking about the suggestions that I offer to others in the book to solve some of our struggles with meeting our goals. I tried out for myself to see how they worked for me and report on my experience of what was more effective for me, what was less effective, and what did I learn along the way when I was my own guinea pig.
I love that. I love that you put yourself out there and then you can talk through in your, like you said, your own experience.
I feel like I've done a lot of dumb things in my life and embarrassed myself quite a bit. So this is just like par for the course. I felt like if this goes wrong, I've had a lifetime of experience of that anyway.
What was the most important thing you discovered while writing this book?
I think it's the idea that there will be no one easy solution to any particular problem. And this book really tries to respect that. I'm not offering sort of a strict formula that I'm prescribing for everybody and suggesting if you follow this, then you will be successful. There are books out there that have that approach, and they may resonate for some people, but that message doesn't resonate for me. The beauty of being human is that we are really idiosyncratic and we have a rich diverse background that we draw from as we set our goals, and that we'll be reacting to as we try to work on them. And so for me to come in strong and say, I've got all the answers to all the problems out there, I just think isn't true. And I'm not sure that it's true for anybody who has a simple, easy suggestion for how do we meet our mark. So really what I'm trying to offer here are 4 pieces of insight that may reflect knowledge that we didn't have before about the power of our eyes, and suggest ways in which how we're looking might be contributing to some of the obstacles that we're facing, and then providing an educational opportunity to suggest if we change our perspective, we might find the job is just a little bit easier. So 4 tools to expand our toolbox that we might call upon in different instances, and that we might transition to as we find one tool just isn't cutting it right now.
Was there one piece of research that, as you were working through the book and doing the research, that was most surprising when it came to goal setting and success?
I think one of the things that was really surprising is the importance of failure. Now, I think maybe even just hearing that word is like shocking. It's not something that we like to talk about. It's sort of a cultural taboo. We try to avoid it at all times. But it really is a key point or a key stage of goal pursuit. And I think our hesitation with even entertaining that concept or engaging in that conversation is because of that stigma of failure. So I guess one of the things that was surprising is that we can expand the conversation if we just change the use of that word. So rather than thinking of our inability to to meet some mark or get some job done as an instance of failure, if we instead think about it as an opportunity for growth, as a point in time when we've been able to take a major leap in the direction of learning, then it really makes us not fear the idea of failure at all, right? Actually, stumbling, experiencing problems and setbacks is an opportunity for creative thinking, for drawing in a larger or a different team to help troubleshoot a solution. When we're successful at finding a new path forward that might be quite different than what we thought would be the solution, we've literally grown our brain. Neuroscience research shows that we create more connections among different neurons in our brain when we approach an obstacle with that mindset and come up with a solution, not thinking about this as a marker for failure, but as an opportunity for learning and growth. When we see that sort of mindset and that philosophy applied in organizations, what you see also is that teams more quickly admit that they are faltering and ask for help. They don't try to hide mistakes, and progress can be made better and faster, more effectively, and for less money. So I think that's what was surprising to me, is that there are so many benefits of accepting the possibility that we might fail, but we have a really hard time engaging with that conversation because of that stigma of the word. So I'm not going to try to change the stigma of the word, especially in the American culture, but instead encourage us to not use the word and frame it differently in our own minds.
I like that. And I'm glad that you're talking about failure and, how it can help you in your path to learning, growing, and ultimately achieving your goals that you have set for yourself or for your team or your organization.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So one of the things that you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the podcast, you were talking about how many tabs we have open, and I was feeling really guilty as you were talking because I'm counting all the tabs that I have open on my computer right now, and I'm thinking a little bit about what you said about multitasking. Can you talk about the science of multitasking and what companies should do differently to help their employees be more productive and maybe meet their goals?
Sure. Multitasking and the ability to multitask is one of the most sought after traits. I mean, if you look for the qualities that an employer is looking in an employee, go to monster.com and type in multitasking, you're going to see that pops up like dozens, if not hundreds of thousands of times. We think that it's a really desirable trait. Now, I'm not saying that it is bad to multitask, but we have to use it as a weapon for good. So multitasking actually can be beneficial, but at some point it actually is detrimental. And the key here is knowing when we should employ it. So there was a really interesting study done of emergency room doctors and looking at how effective are they at treating their patients. Now, doctors, especially in an emergency room, are probably asked to multitask quite a lot, and the consequences of their ability to do it well might be really extreme, right? I mean, we're talking in some cases about life versus death. So what they found was that when doctors were handling a pretty minimal caseload, like maybe just one or two patients in the ER at any one given point in time, they got a good quality of care. But the amount of time that it took for a doctor to discharge the patient per patient actually was a little bit longer than when that number creeped up to 3 or 4. Now, that might be surprising, right? You would just think, like, if there are fewer patients there, then a doctor should be able to, like, really focus on that patient and make the best, most informed decision with the least amount of, like, time waste that might exist. But that's not what they found. Instead, this analysis found that when the doctors were asked to multitask a little bit more, they became more efficient with their time. They found ways to carve out downtime, the down moments while they're maybe waiting for lab results to come back or they're waiting for another doctor to come in for a consultation. Those moments in their day when they're forced to wait, they use that time more effectively. They thought faster. They figured out how to effectively multitask or take advantage of that downtime. And as a result, the amount of time per patient decreased. So they worked more efficiently when they were asked to multitask a little bit more. But there was a tipping point at some point, and it was around patient number 5 or 6, that the demands, the benefits of multitasking exceeded the costs of them. So when tapped too much, their ability to work effectively and to take advantage of those down moments, it just wasn't possible to sustain anymore. And in fact, what they found was when pushed beyond that brink, pushed past that tipping point, the patients were discharged, but they came back to the emergency room within 24 hours at a higher rate, which suggested either they didn't receive the proper diagnosis and the symptoms weren't being treated, or they weren't given the right course of treatment and the symptoms that were correctly diagnosed weren't going away. So what all of that suggests is that they weren't able to do their job as well when they were pushed beyond that breaking point. The take-home message here, I mean, maybe very few of us that are listening to this podcast are emergency room doctors, though some perhaps are. But I think there's a bigger message here that can be applied to everybody, which is know the space that we're playing in. If we're feeling understimulated, maybe because this is an area of expertise for us, or the job just really isn't that challenging, multitasking actually might produce a sort of cognitive load or put a demand on our mental resources that is engaging and exciting and like a challenge that is fun to figure out how to handle. But then be aware of how thinly we feel spread. And when the demands become greater, when the challenges or the expertise required grows, then we need to scale back on the multitasking because our cognitive resources can't be spread so thin that we do the job poorly. So there is no right answer here of like, how many tabs can I have open? Well, that depends on the person and the level of expertise they have and what it is that they're working on right now and what is it calling from them. But knowing that that is true in general can help us sort of self-diagnose where we're at on this multitasking spectrum. Would we benefit from it, or are we at that tipping point where we need to close it down and focus up?
I love it. And I am closing down some tabs right now for sure. I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Where can people go to learn more about you and the book that's coming out?
You can just Google Clearer, Closer, Better, and you'll find it on Random House's webpage. There's links to where you can learn more about the book, biographies, pictures, and a whole lot more.
Awesome. We'll link to the book in the transcript of the podcast and also link for more about Emily, and so you can connect with her and pick up the book.
Great. Thanks so much.
It's about that time of year when we start chastising ourselves for not making progress on our New Year's resolutions. But what if we simply took a step back and set new New Year's resolutions? Through the science of behavioral psychology as it applies to goal setting and success, we can teach ourselves how to set goals better, learn how to visualize them, and make them more manageable in both our work and our personal lives. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to talk to Emily on the podcast today. Go pick up her book at any available bookstore. I will be, and I hope you will too. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Workology. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.